You're listening to old Western stories, where dust settles slow, guns speak loud, and every tale rides straight into your imagination. Hit that subscribe and saddle up, the ride's just starting. Evening laid itself quiet over Haddon Ridge. That kind of quiet that ain't peace so much as a breath held too long. And Elias Booker felt it through the boards of his shop before he ever smelled the dust rolling off the trail. His hands were black with oil and metal filings, his apron stiff as bark, lamp casting a slow gold circle over the bench where he'd been mending a trigger spring older than half the town. He worked gentle, deliberate, same as he always had since he swore off firing a gun for good, the vow living in his bones like an ache winter couldn't shake. He'd been a sharpshooter once, a Union Blue ghost who could split a playing card at 80 yards. But war has its own appetite, and it had eaten too much of him. When Abigail died, he buried the last bullet he ever planned to pull, then buried the rifle right after. Folks in Haddon Ridge respected that quiet. The mountains east of town held the last of the sunlight, and the wind slid down from them carrying dry sage and the far-off ring of a hammer from Silas Dreely working late at the ranch. Elias had been teaching that boy the shape of steel, how a barrel breathes when it cools, how a gun don't kill so much as the hand that points it, but he never taught him the part about taking a life. That knowledge he kept locked behind ribs still tender from memory. He set the spring on the bench, rubbed his thumb across the scar on his palm, a long white reminder of the last time a trigger bit him, and listened. Hoofbeats. Not the loose rhythm of ranch hands drifting home, not freight, not law. This was a single rider, pacing slow, as if letting the horse choose the moment to break the spell of the evening. Elias straightened, wiped his hands on the apron, and felt that old soldier sense rise in him like a ghost waking from its cot. The steps stopped outside. The door didn't open right away. Whoever it was let the silence stretch, a kind of test. Then the latch clicked, soft but sure, and the door swung inward. Jace Brannigan stepped through like a man stepping onto a stage he'd already measured. Tall, lean, hair tied back, with something that wasn't string and wasn't respect neither. His smile was the worst kind, warm at the edges, cold at the eyes. "Evenin', Smith," he said, dusting his hat with a slow sweep. "Town's quieter than a church with no sinners." Elias set the lamp wick lower. "Evenin'. If you're looking for Nolan Pike, Sheriff's office is the next building down." Brannigan chuckled, a soft rattle. "I ain't after badges. I'm after bullets." Elias didn't move, didn't blink. Just let the calm sit between them. "You won't find any for sale here." The drifter took a long look around the shop. Wall racks empty except for a few hunting rifles under repair, drawers closed tight, counter clean. "Strange thing for a gunsmith," Brannigan said. "Not selling bullets." "Not strange," Elias said. "Just my way. Your way don't suit me much. Ain't built to." Brannigan set his elbows on the counter, leaning in just close enough to sour the lamplight. "Heard you were the best shot Haddon Ridge ever spat out. Heard you quit. Heard you don't touch ammunition now, less it's for fixin' farmers' squirrels." Elias kept his breathing slow. "You heard right. Man with your past ought to be more obligin' when trouble's comin'." "Trouble rides its own horse," Elias said, voice steady as cooled iron. "Not mine." Brannigan let the smile fade. "I need 50 rounds of .44, clean and true. I pay fair. No. I pay good. Still no." The drifter's eyes narrowed, like he was peering into Elias's bones for reasons that weren't his to take. You think refusing keeps you holy? Elias felt his jaw tighten, not from anger but from the memory of Abigail's hand on his cheek the night she died, her breath thin, her voice telling him he'd laid down enough death for one life. I think refusing keeps blood off my floor, he said. That's enough. Brannigan pushed off the counter, boots whispering across the boards as he turned slow, taking in every corner of the shop again, but this time with a different hunger. Town's got a softness to it, he murmured. Soft places draw hard things. Elias didn't answer. The drifter stepped back to the door but paused with his hand on the frame. Something's coming over the ridge, he said. Something hungry. When it gets here, bullets'll matter more than conscience. Elias didn't flinch. Then may God help it, he said, because I won't. Brannigan lingered, waiting for something. Fear, maybe, or a crack in the armor of quiet. Elias gave him neither. The drifter tipped 2 fingers off his hat brim. See you sooner than you'd like. Then he was gone, boot steps fading into the cooling dusk. Elias let out the breath he'd been holding since the first hoofbeat. The shop felt smaller now, the corners darker. The storm lantern on the outside hook flickered as wind curled under the eaves. He reached for the cloth on the bench and wiped the spring again, letting his hands do the only thing that steadied him. A faint scuff came from behind the shop, soft, hesitant. Elias turned. Silas Dreely stood in the doorway leading to the back room, hat in his hands, cheeks flushed from either cold or eavesdropping. "Mr. Booker," he said, voice cracking with youth. "That man, he looking for trouble?" Elias studied the boy. A hard worker, honest heart, still green enough to believe trouble always announces itself proper. "He's looking for something," Elias said. "We'll leave it at that." Silas shifted. "Sheriff Pike says there've been riders spotted north. Maybe a gang. Maybe worse." Elias set the spring down gentle. "Nolan's a good man. He'll handle what comes." The boy swallowed. "Looks like that man expects you to." Elias didn't answer. He walked to the door, opened it a crack. The street outside lay still, lanterns hanging like small suns straining against night. Far off, coyotes yipped, restless. Brannigan's silhouette was already gone, swallowed by the dark. Elias closed the door, turned down the lamp, and felt the ghosts of his past shift in the shadows. Old comrades, old enemies, and Abigail's soft voice telling him that some vows keep a man alive, and some break him slow. "Lock up, Silas," he said. "Go home." "Yes, sir. But Mr. Booker?" Elias waited. "What if that fella comes back?" Elias looked at the unfinished rifles on the bench, the tools lying neat as prayer beads, the vow buried deeper than the bullets he'd sworn never to touch. "Then he'll find me here," he said. "Same as now, not selling a thing he wants." Outside, the Nevada night thickened, the kind of dark that brings trouble quiet and close. In the distance beyond the ridge line, a faint echo, hoofbeats multiplied, moving like a storm with purpose. Elias closed the shutters tight, the click of each latch a promise he hoped he could keep. The dread settled in his bones slow, deliberate, same as the cold creeping into the valley. Something was coming, and a man who wouldn't sell a bullet was about to learn what price the world puts on refusal. Trouble doesn't ride in fast. It circles first, sniffing for weakness. And by the next morning, Haddon Ridge felt like something had its nose pressed against the windows. The sky wore that copper tint that comes before a dust storm, and folks moved slower, eyes drawn toward the northern ridge where rumor said Brannigan and his riders were drifting like wolves waiting for dusk. Elias Booker opened his shop same as always, lantern trimmed low, tools laid out careful, but the air inside felt tight, as if the walls themselves were holding breath. Before he could set a barrel in the vise, the door swung open and Sheriff Nolan Pike stepped in, hat dusted, jaw set. Heard Brannigan's men were seen near the wash, Pike said, voice calm but stretched thin. 3 of them. Didn't come close, just watched. Elias wiped his hands. Watching ain't a crime. No, Pike said, but watching's what buzzards do before they set down. Elias didn't answer. Pike paced once, boots creaking. Elias, the town's scared. They want to know if you'll help them arm up. I told you, Elias said steady, I ain't selling bullets. This ain't about selling. This is about survival. Elias looked at the sheriff, saw the weight in his shoulders. I ain't putting rounds into hands that'll panic and kill someone who don't deserve it. Pike pressed a palm to the counter. You could help train 'em then. I ain't teaching folks how to kill either. Pike's eyes softened, but only for a breath. War's knocking. Elias, you can't just sit behind this counter and pretend it'll pass by polite. Elias met his gaze, old ghosts shifting behind his ribs. I ain't pretending. I'm refusing. Pike exhaled through his teeth, nodded once, and stepped out with the anger of a man who knows he's right, but powerless to change a stubborn heart. By noon, the rumors had grown legs. A rancher named Bell rode into town swearing someone slashed his pasture fence clean through, 2 posts chopped, wire curled on the dirt like a snake shedding skin. Mid-afternoon brought worse. A freight wagon limped into town with one wheel cracked and the driver shaken pale, claiming riders forced him off the road just to watch him sweat. They didn't take anything, didn't say anything, just looked at him long enough to carve fear into his bones. Word drifted fast, folks whispering Brannigan's name like it was poison that might hear them. Silas Dreely came into the shop late afternoon, breath thin, eyes darting. Mr. Booker, he said, Pa sent me to check the north fence. I heard something out by the dry creek bed. Hooves, low talking. They stopped when I got close. Elias felt that cold ribbon slide down his spine. You see 'em? No, sir. But they knew I was there. I could feel it. The boy swallowed, hands trembling. Elias handed him a cup of water, made him drink. They touch you? No. Follow you? Silas shook his head. But I heard one of them laugh. Elias closed his eyes briefly, seeing Brannigan's smile stretching across a darker landscape now. Go on home, Silas. Stay close to your people. Silas hesitated. Mr. Booker, the sheriff says you used to... Elias cut him quiet with a look. What I used to ain't what I am now. Silas lowered his gaze. I didn't mean nothing. Just scared, I guess. Being scared ain't shame, Elias said. It keeps you alive. But the boy didn't look convinced. At dusk, the first real sign landed like a hammer blow. A shout came from the Dreely ranch, carried by the wind, sharp and urgent. Elias stepped outside, squinting into the orange smoke of sunset. Riders moved along the far ridge, shadows, 3 or 4, maybe more. They didn't come down, they didn't need to. They were testing, probing, measuring the backbone of Haddon Ridge same as a knife tests hide. Pike and 2 deputies rode hard past Elias's shop, dust flying. Pike shouted, "They're moving west, stay inside." Elias watched the riders vanish behind the ridge, leaving only the ache of threat hanging over the rooftops. Not long after, Pike came back, face drawn tight. "They're scouting, just scouting," he said. But the look in his eyes said scouting was only the beginning. "Elias, I'm asking again. Arm the damn town." Elias stood stiff. "I can't." Pike's voice cracked under the strain. "You can't, or you won't." Elias felt the world narrow to the sheriff's eyes, to the hurt and the fear and the frustration in them. "I made a vow," he said. "To who?" "To my wife." Pike's face softened. "Abigail was a good woman, but she wouldn't want Haddon Ridge to burn on account of your conscience." Elias felt something hot twist in him but kept his voice low. "You didn't see what war made of me. She did. She saved what was left." Pike blew out a breath. "And what about the rest of us, Elias? Who's going to save us?" Elias didn't have an answer. Silence opened wide between them. Silas, who'd been lingering outside, heard every word. The look he gave Elias wasn't disappointment, not yet, but something close. Not understanding, not agreement, just fear seeking something solid to hold on to. Elias looked away, first. Night dropped heavy. The wind picked up, pushing dust through the alleys, rattling shutters. Elias closed his shop early, checked each lock twice, then sat at his bench pretending he could work. Every scratch of metal sounded like a hoofbeat. Every shift in the floorboard sounded like someone leaning close to the window. When the knock came, it wasn't loud. It was soft, almost polite, but Elias felt his heart jump into his throat. "Mr. Booker?" Silas's voice wavered, breathless. Elias opened the door fast. The boy stood panting, eyes wide with something worse than fear, knowledge. "Mr. Booker, you need to come now." They crossed the dark street, the boy leading fast, the wind slapping dust against their coats. Silas brought him behind the livery, where shadows pooled thick. A dead horse lay there, Danvers' old roan, stiff already, eyes open to nothing. A bullet hole marked its brow. The lantern beside it lay smashed, glass scattered like teeth. And on Elias's own back door, nailed through the wood, was a single .44 round. Polished, clean, placed where a man might put a calling card. Elias reached out, pulled the nail free, held the bullet in his palm. Cold metal, cold promise. Silas trembled beside him. "They know who you are," he whispered. Elias closed his fist around the bullet, the shape biting into his scar. The vow he'd carried for years felt like a rope pulled too tight, fibers popping under strain. For a long moment he didn't breathe, didn't move. The night around them felt poised, waiting to see which way a man breaks. "Mr. Booker," Silas said, voice tiny, "what do we do?" Elias stared into the darkness beyond the livery, past the ridge, past the places where Brannigan's men prowled like wolves, scenting weakness. The decision hadn't been made yet, not fully, but the truth sat ugly in his chest. The war wasn't coming. It was already here. "Storm's here," Elias said, voice low as a grave, and the wind carried the words into the waiting dark. Night pressed down on Haddon Ridge like a hand over a lantern, smothering what little comfort daylight had left behind. And by the time the first shutters creaked, closed, the whole town felt coiled, tight as a sprung trap. Folks boarded windows early, lamps lit too soon, every glow behind glass looking more like a warning than warmth. Whispers traveled faster than horses, carrying Brannigan's name through every doorway like a curse the walls couldn't keep out. Elias Booker felt it in his bones the moment he stepped out of his shop, the air heavy with dust and dread, sky bruised as if the ridge itself knew wolves were slipping closer. He heard a gun crack far off, one single shot sharp enough to slice the dark. Then the long echo of riders laughing low, a sound that crawled under the skin like cold water. Sheriff Pike was already pacing the boardwalk, hand on his holster, jaw tight. He looked at Elias like a man looking at a locked door while flames creep up the porch. "They're pushing us," Pike said, circling, testing, waiting for someone to break. Elias didn't answer. He tightened the shutter on his window, each metal click feeling more like a heartbeat than a sound. Across the street, a rancher wrestled with a loose hinge, glancing over his shoulder every few seconds like he expected Brannigan himself to step out of the shadows. The ridge lights flickered, lanterns swaying in the wind. Then, a silhouette rode slow along the crest above town. Just one figure, holding a torch, letting fire cast long fangs of light down the rocks. A taunt. A promise. Elias watched it too long, until the rider lifted the torch high like a signal and vanished behind the stone teeth. Pike hissed through his teeth. "They're showing us they can stand wherever they please." Elias closed his eyes a moment, Abigail's voice whispering behind the dark of his eyelids, reminding him of vows made when war still stained his hands. Later, when the lamps inside the boarding house guttered and the last saloon door shut early, Silas Dreely came running up the alley behind the smithy, breath fogging, eyes wide. "Mr. Booker, hear that?" he whispered. Elias listened. At first, just the wind. Then, hooves, slow and deliberate, too slow for honest travel. A whistle followed, soft and mean, drifting along the street like smoke. Silas shivered hard. "Why ain't you helping, Mr. Booker? Why won't you fight?" The boy's voice cracked with fear and something else. Hurt. Elias steadied him with a hand on the shoulder. "Because every bullet fired owes a debt, son, and I done paid mine twice over." "But what about us?" Silas said. "We ain't done nothing to deserve this." Elias swallowed, felt the knot in his chest tighten like someone twisting wire through bone. "I know. But killing changes a man. And I promised your Miss Abigail I'd never pick up that change again." Silas stared at him, chest rising fast. Sometimes a promise can get people killed. Elias opened his mouth, but no answer came. Not one. That didn't taste like ash. And the boy shook free, running back into the dark where the lantern glow thinned. The night grew mean after that. More riders on the ridge, more shadows slipping between buildings. A whiskey bottle shattered on the boardwalk near Pike's office. Then a bullet hissed past the livery and buried itself in the sheriff's sign, the crack of the shot making every lantern in town jump. Pike reappeared from the smoky dark, breath hard, fury etched in his face. "They're probing us, Elias," he growled. "One push at a time. You know this game better than anyone. If you'd help me arm these people," Elias held up a hand. "Nolan, don't." "Don't?" Pike stepped in close. "Brannigan's laughing at this town, at me, at you, and you're hiding behind ghosts." Elias braced himself, voice low. "I ain't hiding. I'm refusing to be who I was." Pike stared at him long enough that the silence between them felt like judgment itself. "Then pray your refusal doesn't get us buried," the sheriff said, and walked into the dark. A little after midnight, the real message dropped. Elias found it when he went around back to douse the outside lantern. Something tugged his boot, soft, wet. He looked down. A calf, barely weaned, lay in the dirt with its throat cut clean. Its hide was marked with a burned symbol, a circle with a slash, the sign Brannigan's gang left when they wanted a man to know he'd been picked. The lantern beside it was kicked over, oil spilling through dust, flame long dead. A bullet sat on top of the calf's chest like a coin left for passage. Elias stared at it too long, the cold metal winking in the moonlight. The world narrowed to his breath, to the way the wind whistled through the alley like it was whispering his name. Silas found him there, eyes glassy. "They left that for you," the boy whispered. "Why? Why are they doing this?" Elias lifted the bullet, felt its weight, felt the old memory of steel and powder rise in him like something buried clawing upward. "Because Brannigan wants me to bend," Elias said, voice rough. "And he knows exactly where to push." Silas swallowed hard, knuckles white around the shovel he'd brought from the ranch. "Mr. Booker, I'm scared." Elias started to speak, but the lie he meant to offer, the one about things being all right, died before it reached his tongue. "So am I," he admitted, the words heavy as spent shells. "I ain't said that in years." Far up on the ridge, a howl split the dark. Human, not coyote. Followed by the low thunder of multiple riders moving into position. More than scouts now, more than watchers. This was wolves tightening the circle, readying for nightfall's work. Elias felt the truth burn through him, hot enough to crack stone. "They're coming in," he said to Silas. "Not tomorrow, not maybe, now." Silas trembled beside him. "Sheriff Pike, should I fetch him?" "He already knows," Elias murmured. "But that ain't stoppin' what's comin'." And in the cold hush after the wind died, Elias heard the sound he'd been dreading since Brannigan first set foot in his shop. The soft scrape of boots on his own porch boards, deliberate, patient, as if death itself had paused to wipe its feet before entering. War wasn't coming anymore. War was knocking. Cut point. Word count, 1287. Night fell like a hammer over Haddon Ridge, heavy and without mercy. And the wind carried that copper-bitten taste that warned a man the storm he'd been trying to outrun had finally found his tracks. Elias Booker felt it before the first shot cracked, felt it in the boards of his shop, in the lantern flame twitching sideways, in the way Silas Dreely's breath hitched as he watched shadows move where shadows shouldn't. Then the gunfire hit. 3 fast shots from the north end of town, sharp enough to shake dust from the rafters. And Haddon Ridge came alive with screams, hoofbeats, shutters slamming, dogs barking, boots pounding across the boardwalk as Brannigan's gang rode in hard and jagged like a saw blade. Riders tore down the main street, whooping wild, shooting windows, shattering lamps, splitting signboards. Glass blew out into the road like sparks from a forge, and folks ran for cover, bodies dropping behind rain barrels and water troughs, mothers dragging children by the collar. Sheriff Pike stumbled into the open, firing twice before a bullet grazed his shoulder and spun him to the dirt. He rolled behind a wagon, breath ragged, barking orders no one could hear over the thunder of hooves. Elias stepped out of his shop unarmed, the vow hanging around him like a noose made of memory. He didn't shout, didn't cry out, just watched as Brannigan's wolves carved through the town he'd tried to hold at arm's length. Silas was at his side, face white, shovel still in his grip from the night before, and Elias grabbed his shirt front. "Get inside," he said. "Now." But the boy shook his head, tears glinting in the lantern light. "People are hurt, Mr. Booker. They need help." Another shot rang out, ricocheting off the forge stone inches from Silas's ear, and Elias yanked him back just as a rider skidded past, firing blindly into the dark. The boy gasped, heart near quitting from shock. Inside, Elias growled, shoving him toward the doorway, and Silas stumbled through just as a second wave of riders cut through the street, spurs flashing, coats flapping like crow wings against firelight. Pike's voice cut through the chaos, raw and frayed. "Elias, for God's sake, help me." Elias froze. The sheriff was pinned down by a toppled water tank, one hand pressing his grazed shoulder, his gun empty. One rider circling him slow, like a buzzard deciding which eye to take first. Elias took a step toward him, reflex born from the soldier he used to be. But his feet stopped, locked by the vow he'd carved into his soul the day Abigail died. He could almost hear her voice, thin but certain, telling him he'd earned peace and didn't need to bury any more pieces of himself behind the trigger. "I can't," he whispered, jaw clenched, breath short. "I can't." The rider near Pike lifted his pistol, took aim, and Pike braced for the end. When Silas burst out of the shop again, shovel raised, screaming at the top of his lungs, "Leave him be!" he shouted, and he swung that shovel like he meant to split the outlaw in half. The rider jerked his gun toward the boy, twitch fast. Elias's heart stopped cold, and the outlaw fired, the shot splitting the air like lightning. The shovel flew from Silas's hands, and he hit the dirt hard, dazed, alive only because the shot clipped the shovel's edge instead of his skull. Something inside Elias cracked with a sound he couldn't hear, a fracture deeper than bone. The sight of that boy sprawled in the dust with death, a hair's breadth from his neck, hit harder than any rifle recoil he'd ever known. "No," Elias whispered, not to Pike, not to Silas, but to himself, because he knew what was coming next, knew what had been coming since the day Brannigan opened his shop door. He stepped forward into the street, hands open, voice low. "Enough." The rider turned his pistol toward him, smirking. "You the smith who won't sell bullets?" Elias didn't blink. "Leave the boy." "Or what?" the outlaw laughed. "You'll refuse me again?" The gang roared behind him, horses stamping, guns glinting, chaos churning into one mean storm. Then a single whistle split the noise. A high, sharp note like steel drawn across bone, and the riders pulled apart as Jace Brannigan himself rode slow down the center of the street, coat flapping, torchlight dancing on his face like the devil's own lantern. He reined in 10 paces from Elias, smile wide and poisonous. "Well now," Brannigan drawled, "look who's finally stepped outside." Elias's fists clenched. "This town ain't yours." "Not yet," Brannigan said, "but it's leaning my way." He nodded at the boy on the ground. "That little lesson was free. Next one costs more." Pike tried to rise, wincing, blood streaking his sleeve. "Brannigan, leave the kid out of this." Brannigan chuckled. "Sheriff, I'll leave what I please. Ain't here for law, I'm here for him." He pointed his pistol at Elias. "I want 50 rounds and that pretty vow of yours folded nice. You give me one, I'll skip the other." Elias met his eyes and found no humanity in them, only hunger sharpened by cruelty. "I ain't giving you a damn thing." Brannigan leaned in his saddle, voice soft and venomous. "Let's see what a vow's worth when folks die for it." And with that, he fired one shot into the sign above Elias's head, splitting the wood clean, showering sparks and splinters over his shoulders. Chaos erupted again, riders shooting lamps, buckboards toppled, dust churned into choking clouds. Elias dragged Silas to cover, the boy coughing, eyes wide as moons. "Why won't you fight?" Silas gasped. "Why?" Elias had no lie left to give. "Because if I start again, I won't stop." The boy stared, breath shallow. But if you don't, we won't stop neither. And Elias felt the truth of it drive into him deeper than any bullet. Brannigan's wolves regrouped at the far end of town, shadows coiling, preparing for the next strike. Riders peeled off toward the ridge. Others took flanking positions, all of it forming a trap around Haddon Ridge, so tight even hope would bleed if it tried to squeeze through. Pike staggered toward Elias, gripping his shoulder to stay upright. "This town won't see morning," he rasped, "unless someone stands up tall enough to be seen." Elias swallowed hard, throat raw. "I buried that man." "Then dig him up," Pike growled, "before Brannigan does it for you." The words hung in the dust, heavy as judgment. Elias turned toward the outskirts of town, toward the scrub path that led beyond the blacksmith shop, beyond the fence line, beyond the place where he'd taken a shovel one night years ago and buried everything he used to be. The night waited, breathless. Silas watched him with hope and fear tangled tight. Pike steadied himself, blood dripping onto the dirt, and Elias Booker took the first slow step toward the hill where his rifle lay under the cold Nevada earth, toward the man he'd sworn never to be again, toward the fight he could no longer avoid. He stopped just short of the place the moonlight caught the turned soil, the shape of memory rising like smoke, his vow trembling like a thin wire pulled too far. One more step and he'd break it. One breath between peace and war, and behind him, far down the ridge, a single gunshot echoed, a sound too close, too sure, too aimed at his very door. The gunshot that split the night didn't echo long. It just hung there over Haddon Ridge like a breath held too long, a message carved into the dark, and Elias Booker knew before the last trace of sound faded that the bullet had been meant for him. The wolves had stopped prowling and started hunting. Torches flared along the ridge, orange teeth biting into the black, riders moving like shadows with purpose, and the air felt tight enough to snap. Doors slammed, shutters closed, lanterns blew out. The town hunched down like an animal that knew the claws were already touching fur. Elias stood at the edge of his yard, Silas, a trembling shape just behind him, Pike limping down the street with blood running down his sleeve and determination holding him upright. This was the end of running, the end of refusing, the end of pretending vows could stop wolves who didn't believe in nothing but hunger. "Mr. Booker," Silas whispered, voice thin as dust, "they're coming for us." Elias nodded slow, throat tight. "I know, son." He looked toward the dark patch of earth behind the last fence post, the place he buried that rifle years ago when he'd sworn never to touch death again. He felt Abigail's presence like a cold hand on his back, not stopping him, not pushing him, just reminding him of what it had cost him to lay that gun down. But now, the cost of holding the vow was being carved into the town he'd called home. Another torch flared. Riders shrieked some wild taunt. A window shattered 2 houses over. Eli felt something inside him twist hard, like a piece of old metal finally giving way. "Stay close," he told Silas. "Whatever happens, stay behind me." The boy nodded, though fear made his whole frame shake. Pike reached them, breath hissing. "He's pushing for a finish," he rasped. "Brannigan wants you, wants the whole damn town to see it." Elias looked him dead in the eyes. "Then they'll see." He stepped off the boardwalk into the cold dirt, each footfall heavy, the sound of his boots swallowed by the rising wind. The earth behind the fence felt colder than the night. He knelt, fingers sinking into the loose soil, shovel marks from years ago still faint but visible enough to make his stomach knot. His hands trembled, not from fear, but from memory, as he dug with bare fingers, pulling back clumps of earth until he felt steel under the tips, cold, unforgiving, familiar. He swallowed hard. Abigail had helped him bury this rifle. She'd held his shoulders while he cried into the dirt, telling him he'd given enough to war, enough to death, enough to ghosts. He rested his hand on the steel barrel like a man touching a gravestone. "Abigail," he whispered, "I tried." His vow snapped like old rope in his chest. Not gone, not forgotten, just no longer able to shield anyone. Silas knelt beside him, breath fogging. "Is that it?" "This is it," Elias whispered, pulling the rifle free, soil falling off it like old sins. The moon caught the barrel and threw a thin silver line down its length, straight and true, and it felt like the world itself had gone silent in recognition. He checked the chamber slow, reverent, slid the single round he'd kept all these years into place. One bullet, one chance, one reckoning. The boy watched with awe and fear braided tight. Pike stepped close, leaning against a post, steadying his bleeding arm. "Elias, it's time." The torches along the ridge suddenly moved as one, descending. Riders poured into the street, hooves kicking up sheets of dust, torches held high to mark the way. Brannigan himself rode at the center, smug as a preacher at his own funeral, grinning like he'd already carved the epitaph on Elias's headstone. The town gathered in the shadows, faces half lit, half terrified, mothers clutching children, old men holding pitchforks they knew wouldn't matter, all waiting, all watching. Brannigan dismounted with a flourish, boots hitting the ground like drum beats. "Booker," he called, voice carrying long and sharp, "come see what your vows bought this town." Elias stepped into the open, rifle low at his side, Silas shadowing him, Pike limp walking behind with his hand on his holster even though he was half spent. Brannigan smiled wide. "There he is, the ghost himself." Elias didn't rise to it, didn't speak, just stared. Brannigan laughed, spreading his arms. "Look at him, Booker. Look at the fear you made." Townsfolk shrank. Lamps flickered. Horses stamped nervously. "But me," Brannigan said, tapping his own chest. "I ain't afraid. You ain't fired a gun in what, 10 years? Maybe more? You're a myth that forgot itself." Elias breathed slow, deep, purpose carving its own path inside him. Brannigan strutted closer. "So let's end this proper. No gang, no crossfire. Just you and me. Street's ours. Town's watching. Let's see if the legend still shoots straight, or if your vow made you soft." Silas stepped forward, voice cracking. "You leave him alone." Brannigan grinned. "That's your boy. Booker, fine-looking courage. Be ashamed to see it bleed out." Elias put an arm out, blocking Silas. "Stay back." Pike straightened a little, fight still holding him up. "Elias, end this." Elias raised the rifle slow, barrel glinting in the torchlight. Brannigan rolled his shoulders, loosened his wrist, hand hovering over his holster like he'd rehearsed this moment in a mirror. "Whenever you're ready, Gunsmith." The street went dead quiet. Even the wind held still. Elias exhaled once, let the weight of all the years gather behind that breath. His vow had been about peace, but peace had a price, and tonight he was the only one left who could pay it. Brannigan sneered. "Too old to draw?" Elias didn't draw. He aimed, straight from the shoulder, calm as sunrise. Brannigan blinked, confused for half a heartbeat, because he expected a duel, a dance, a show. But Elias Booker didn't give shows. He gave truth. One shot. The rifle thundered like the sky itself had cracked. Brannigan jerked back, disbelief on his face, then hit the dirt hard, torch rolling from his hand and sputtering out. His riders froze, stunned, the echo of that single shot hitting them harder than any bullet. Then the line broke, half scattering into the dark, the rest dismounting slowly with hands raised. Silence hit harder than the gunfire. Elias lowered the rifle, breath shaking, chest tight, the cost of the shot burning down his spine like a confession too long held. Silas rushed to his side. "Mr. Booker, you did it." Pike limped forward, nodding once, slow and deep. "Town's safe," he murmured, "because of you." The townsfolk edged closer, unsure, some grateful, some fearful, none able to understand the weight that settled on Elias's shoulders. He stared at the rifle in his hands, the steel warm now where it had been cold a minute before. One bullet, one choice, one ending. He knelt, setting the rifle gently on the ground as though it were a sleeping child he didn't want to wake. "Silas," he said, voice rough, "that gun's yours now, but don't carry it unless you got no other choice." Silas swallowed, nodded, picked it up with both hands, reverent, careful. Elias rose slow, looked out over the town he'd just saved, the dust settling around his boots like tired snow. Pike put a hand on his good shoulder. "You all right?" Elias shook his head once. "But I will be." The wind carried the quiet. No cheers, no applause, just the sound of a town breathing again. Elias turned toward the darkness beyond the last fence post, toward whatever path waited next, the vow shattered but not gone, only changed. And before he stepped away, he said, soft as worn leather, "Storm's gone, but a man still carries what he chooses." Then he walked into the settling dust as Haddon Ridge exhaled behind him. You've been riding with old Western stories. If the tale hit your mark, give it a like, drop a comment about your favorite part, and ring that bell so you don't miss the next trail we ride. Don't forget, hit that subscribe so you're always in the saddle, and you'll always be ready when the next story rides in.